Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for that very long introduction.
yeah. Thanks a lot, ma'am. And I also welcome Mr. Raman Madhuk, who is acting as an advisor to the management, Sayadri College of Management. I welcome you, sir, for the webinar series. Today, he is going to be the moderator for this webinar series.
Thank you, Dean Ramesh,
Yeah.
for the introductions. And it's indeed my pleasure to welcome you all and good evening. I'm indeed very privileged to have this conversation with Anita, whom I know actually for more than 42 years. And thanks to her deep knowledge of the subject which she practices almost every day, well, that's one of the reasons why I'm still sane and married to her for 40 years, you know. So Anita, to me, emotions are intense feelings that are directed at someone or something. They are the responses which are significantly, affecting our internal and external environment. And one of the very interesting definition which I saw of emotion recently was emotion is nothing but energy in motion, which needs to be harnessed. And I think that's how the topic came. So what's your take on it? Can you take us on this journey?
Thank you, Raman. And I don't want to make this very heavy and, too much of psychology stuff for everybody. They get enough of that on WhatsApp. I just want to share some very practical experiences, having been a practicing psychologist and now moving away from counseling, more into coaching. And I would love to just share a lot of my experiences and some of the stories that happened along the way. Also, just this morning, couple of hours ago, there was someone sitting here in my office right in front of me and saying, look, I think I'm just too emotional, and I just, feel like I cannot control. I feel overwhelmed. I feel sometimes I'm drowning. Of course, I advised him to look at this webinar today. But other than that, I'm not sure he's here or not. But other than that, there have been so many journeys, so many stories of people whom I've interacted with as a behavioral scientist, as a psychologist, one-to-one, sometimes in groups, sometimes casual conversations. And if you keep an ear open to listen to people, and I'm a good listener after 42 years of marriage, I've learned that one skill. It's just that, you listen to their stories and they have, so much to share. And then you piece all the learnings together, and some way you also grow as a human being and as a coach. I have also learned and grown as a result of my profession. And I do believe that others have also learned it. So I'm going to share some of my experiences, a few. As I'm speaking, if you have any question, just put it in the chat box. And I will appreciate if you can keep yourself on mute, because you never know, what sound is creeping in from your background. And then everyone looks, who's this person whose sound is leaking out? So let me begin with a short 15-minute presentation. And then Raman and I have planned to get into some kind of a dialogue and a question-answer, sharing of our experiences, so that we can shed some more light on the matter. So here goes. Just give me 1 second to get the presentation up. And so use your emotions to your advantage. Actually, just the other day over a breakfast table, we were discussing, so many experiences. And I said, people don't know the power of their emotions. And people don't know how the emotions can be used and can be, a great fuel for your passion in life and for your reason and your purpose in life, for your ikigai. Everyone has heard the word ikigai these days. So mostly people talk in terms of emotional intelligence. Now, to me, emotional intelligence is a slightly different concept, because in emotional intelligence, we'll use our emotions to interact. We use our intelligence to interact with other people's emotions, so that we can look at them, understand ourselves through the eyes of our intelligence. But we still haven't worked with our own emotions. And I do believe that it is important for us to work with our own emotions so that we can use those emotions and channelize that energy. So Raman was right when he says emotion is energy plus motion. And a little bit of the etymology of the word emotion. The word emotion contains the word motion as well. And somewhere around mid-16th century, from Latin and French roots came the word emotion, which means to move, something that moves. And initially, emotion was more like a social movement, like, for example, a women's liberation movement or a revolution in society of some kind. So it was meant to represent that. But today we think of emotions as our feelings. But this is only mid-16th century, and when you look at Western literature, you see only things 300-400 years old. But when you look at yourself, you have your own individual meanings. So I'd like everyone to place it in the chat box. What does the word emotion mean to you? And now don't think of the word emotion as a scientific term that needs to be defined. Think of your life, your experiences, relate to that, and think of one line that you can say what emotion means to you. And I'll be looking at some of the answers. Please start sharing. Please start sharing your answers. Somebody is saying feelings. Pooja is saying feelings. And Abhijit says combinations of feelings and sentiments. Okay, we'll come to that too. A sentiment is a positive or a negative. That's a sentiment, that there is something good or something bad. And when we say sentiment, yeah, there's a feeling, I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad. But feelings by themselves don't have a sentiment. It's just that we assign those meanings to that. So Vani says emotion is experience and feelings. That's wonderful. That's great. Ramesh sir says expressing oneself according to circumstances. Okay, that's emotional intelligence. You know, according to the circumstances, situationally, we will express ourselves. Vivek says it's a channel for expressing thoughts and feelings. Yeah, the thoughts are here and the feelings are here. So it's a combination of the head and heart, and we will be looking at the neurosciences of emotions as well in a little bit. And Shashank says it's a kind analysis of what we are experiencing. I'm not sure about that. I think we are experiencing something and we put a label on it and say, hey, I'm feeling annoyed, or I'm feeling irritated, or I'm feeling happy, or I'm feeling frustrated. And it's that feeling, the label that we give, that determines the... Okay, if anyone can decipher this one, you can decipher what it means to say that an emotion is a catalyst, increases rate of reaction. You can decipher that one. And emotions is the negative and positive inner voice that is to be handled to avoid chaos and to be pushed to move ahead. Okay, yes, I think that is a wonderful point of view, Nitin Suvaya. That is really exactly getting the essence of this program and what we are about to explore. So while we all have our own ways of putting words to what we mean by feelings, let's spend the next 1 hour exploring what this means. And maybe at the end of this 1 hour or whatever is left of it, there will be some takeaways for each one of you in terms of some new insight or something that you related to that made sense to you in your own world. So someone said sentiment, someone said feeling, someone said so many things, and there was the word emotion that emerged only in the mid-16th century. But we've had like 200 BC, we've had more than 2,000, 200 years of understanding feelings, because in the Natya Shastra, it was, described that there are 9 rasas, or the rasa means the essence of life. And this was what was interpreted, was later labeled as emotions or feelings. And there is another simultaneous work of Indian, writing, which had articulated the 8 bhavas, or the bhavnas, the 8 bhavnas. And these 8 bhavnas were considered more of sentiments because they had positive and negative attached, whereas the nav ras was pure emotion. And it's the ras and it's the essence. It's much later that we start saying this is good or bad. And that's a much later interpretation of feelings. So the 9 pure feelings are peace, love, joy, sorrow, anger, disgust, fear, astonishment, and confidence. And you can feel all of these in one day. In the course of one day or 1 hour, you can experience all of these. And it can be like a bit of a roller coaster ride, because sometimes we fail to put labels to it. They say that WhatsApp messages are now better. The more emoticons you use, the better there is. And there is something called an emojiology. And I think there are over 500, maybe more emoticons in your mobile phones that help you express your feelings. But here are some of them for you. And I don't need to introduce you to these, definitely not. As many psychologists exist in the world, that many frameworks, classifications, understandings, points of view on emotions also exist. So I've just chosen 1 or 2 for you to highlight how it's an experience, and how different people put different labels to that experience, and that label helps to express it in a way that others can understand. So when I say I'm feeling, say for example, I'm feeling a sense of safety. So I could be feeling, that I'm at peace, I'm rested, I'm restful, I'm stress-free. There was some threat which is now gone. And when I say I'm feeling a sense of safety, it means the other person can understand me when I put a label to it. And that's the purpose of putting labels. So here they put colors as well as labels to various feelings. So this is one way of looking at feelings. It's the colors of your emotions. And the colors mean, the yellow colors mean more positivity and joy, and the red colors mean more fire and action, and the blue colors mean more, success and more, confidence and just staying above it all. So in my 40 years of practice, I have come across so many statements, and each time these statements get repeated. So I put them into these 9 statements, which captures everything. One group of people says, I don't have too many feelings. And there was this young boy sitting in one of my personal growth labs, and he says, I don't have any feelings. So I said, okay, so let's not give him any lunch today and see what he says. Oh, no, I'm feeling hungry. I said, there you have a feeling, don't you? Okay, what's for lunch? I said, there's idlis for lunch. Oh, I love idlis. I said, you have a feeling, don't you? So we don't sometimes connect with our feelings, and therefore we don't label that feeling, and therefore we don't feel we have feelings. So a lot of people like that. I don't have too many feelings. Some people say I am too emotional, which means that, sometimes my emotions are so strong, they overwhelm me and I keep drowning in them, and I'm not able to express myself because the emotion has overtaken me. Now in psychology, we call this an amygdala hijack, but I'm not going to go into the scientific part of it, because that will be in another lecture altogether. Some people say I'm not suited for work as I'm too emotional. And on the contrary, I know many HR managers who say we need to hire less emotional people. Why? Because it's easier to deal with people's actions and tell them to do the right things without getting the emotional clutter in the way. And I just tell the HR manager who says we need less emotional people, I just tell him that, hey, listen, if you don't have emotional people, you'll be missing out on the passion that you need to drive people to achieve things. So I disagree with most of these statements. 3 days ago, there was one person sitting in this room saying, my boss lacks emotional empathy. doesn't understand my feelings. He just treats me like a robot, gives me work instructions I have to do and I have to follow, and that's it. I'm just a pair of hands and legs for him. So there's no sense of empathy. So now empathy is another world altogether. Empathy is when you feel and you connect with another person's emotions and feelings. There's no place for emotions in the workplace. And this is, I hear this regularly, at least 2 or 3 times every month. And I hear this one very regularly. There's no place for emotions in the workplace. And I said, okay, tell me when, Gandhiji started the Quit India movement, he had no emotions. Well, we'll have to think about that. All right, so this is very common. My feelings are all mixed up and it's overwhelming most of the time. You cannot identify. I recently came across somebody, who had a birthday, and it was a very important birthday. He was reaching 60 years of age. And I wished him happy birthday, but he didn't reply to my message. And then a couple of months later, when I met him, I said, why did you not reply to my message? He says, I had too much birthday that birthday. Which means I was like kind of overwhelmed and drowning in all the feelings that on that birthday. And I've had too much birthday on that birthday. I was feeling good because it's my birthday, but I was feeling lousy because there were so many messages and I didn't know how to respond to them. So feelings get all mixed up. Good feelings, bad feelings, and sometimes that gets very overwhelming. We cannot sort them out into different categories. So there's a whole field of sciences called affective neurosciences. Affect is the world of feelings and affect. It's like cognition, conation, and affect. Cognition is thinking, conation is doing, and affect is feeling. So affective neurosciences, which looks at the root of our emotions in our brain. And there's definitely a link between what we are feeling and what's going on inside our brain. But then this can get very, confusing and very technical, and maybe we won't understand, maybe I won't understand. So in the world of coaching, we simplify the neurosciences and we say that there are 3 brains inside our brain, and that's just to simplify it. The first is the reptilian brain, and this is mostly the hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala. It's called the limbic system. And this is a part of the brain that evolved along with the reptiles, the era of the reptiles, which is more than 250 million years old. Now, this part of the brain has some feelings, but mostly these feelings are because in those days, the reptiles, it was a bad world. They had to survive, and it was about the body and physical survival. So they would respond to any kind of threat. So fight, fright, or flight. So the reptilian brain still resides in us and still exists and is responsible for our self-preservation. And more importantly for psychologists, it's important for our self-image preservation. So if somebody tells me that, hey, I think you should do this, but it doesn't sit well with me, I say, hey, but that's not who I am. And that doesn't sit well with my self-image. So I get defensive because my self-image is threatened. So all your defense reactions, they come from this reptilian brain. And this is as much as 250 million years old. So this is so hardwired that it's very difficult to ignore. The second part is the mammalian brain, which is most of the central lobes of the brain, which govern our endocrine system. And which is the seat of our emotions, where we feel all the navrasas and all. And this came into existence when reptiles evolved and mammals evolved from the previous reptilian era. And this is 150 million years old. So all your navrasas like anger, disgust, joy, love, all those are hardwired into you for the last 150 million years. So if you try to deny an emotion and say, hey, I'm not feeling annoyed, we know very well as a psychologist, we know that you are feeling something, annoyed or something, and your reptilian brain is denying that it exists. And the more you suppress it, the more active it will become in a bit. Then comes the frontal brain, the frontal cortex, the cerebral cortex as it's called. This is the human brain. And this is where intelligence developed. This is 2 to 3 million years old. And then language as a part of this brain, ability to communicate. Till then there was no communication. The ability to communicate evolved about 60,000 years ago. And the language as we know it today, what we speak today, is only about 150 years ago. The English that we speak, the languages are about 150 to 200 years old, other than many of the South Indian languages, which like Tamil and all are very ancient languages. Never mind, even Sanskrit as a language is roughly 5,000 to 10,000 years old. So the capacity of the human brain to think through, add logic, reasoning, intelligence, awareness is not that hardwired into our brains. So emotional intelligence doesn't come naturally. No one is born emotionally intelligent. It's something that you learn and acquire along the way. When we reason through our emotions, when we put logic, we put rationale, and we try to understand them, we try to experience them. Now, the big thing about this is, and science has discovered, that this human brain is responsible for us as human beings, for our superior intelligence, but it functions only under two conditions. And the first condition is that the mammalian brain must be quietened, must be relaxed, must be chilled. And the second condition under which the human brain functions is when the reptilian brain must be relaxed and chilled. Okay, so we need to relax the defense mechanisms by earning trust and by saying, hey, listen, we are not threatening you, we are here to support you. And we must relax the mammalian brain by saying we are not going to pass judgment on your emotions. Emotions are what they are, and let's experience those emotions. They are the essence of life, and we are not going to pass judgment on them. Only then can we learn to be what it means to be human. Now, very quickly, I'm going to move on because I spent enough time already. Emotions have a physiology, which we just talked about very briefly in the neurosciences. And emotions also have a chemistry. So there are, these are like drugs. They act like drugs. So you've got your mobile phone and you're stuck onto this and you're scrolling meaninglessly. And there is a Facebook and you put a post on Facebook, you've uploaded your new profile picture and you want to check every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, how many likes do I have? That is the reason is every time you see someone puts a like there, it gives you a dopamine shot in your brain because it's like a pat on your back. Someone likes you. Someone likes your picture. Someone has given you a positive reinforcement. It's the reward chemical. Every time you receive a reward, a little dopamine shot gets created in your brain, in your system. And that gives a very feel-good factor. The second feel-good factor of the emotion is the love hormone. It's called oxytocin. So when you see a little baby, you want to hug the little doggy, you want to hug that doggy, teddy bears, parents, lovers, the love hormone. You can see when there's couples in love, the look on their eyes and their feelings are completely different. And then there are the endorphins, which are the painkillers. So when you feel down, a lot of people, they say, okay, I'm feeling low today, let me go do a good workout. And they go for a walk or they go for a run or they go for a cycle. And then they come back saying, hey, I'm feeling much better. Because when we work out and when we do physical exercise, some endorphins get released. And these are like, they give you a little high. The endorphin gives you a little high. And it numbs the pain for a little while. And lastly is the serotonin. So someone says, hey, I'm drowning in my emotions. I'm too emotional. I'm overwhelmed. And then there are ways to generate through meditation, through calming exercises. We generate serotonin through positive psychology. We generate serotonin in the brain that, the ups and downs and the roller coasters in your life, they become a little smoother. And get less pronounced. So there are chemicals also of emotions, and these also need to be understood if we are going to channelize the energy that our emotions are going to produce. Okay, second chat box question. How do you manage feelings like anger and frustration? I'd love to hear from everybody. How do you manage feelings like anger and frustration? Yes. So can the answers to that question come in? I had to move out of the slideshow to be able to see the chat box. Okay, Abhijit says by practicing patience. And Shraddha says it's control, I control it. I put a cap on it and say this much and no more. Okay. What else? Some of the strategies. How do you manage strong feeling? Anger is, there's not a single person who doesn't get angry. Listening to music, Jasmita, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And Ramesh says, I divert. I look at something else. If someone is in the classroom is annoying me and trying to heckle me, I look at something else. I divert my attention. Manish says, I watch some entertainment movies. So it's a form of diversion and a form of distraction. Vani says, I count numbers, and you count backward from 100, 99, 98 onwards. Okay. Nitin again says, stay alone and analyze the situation for answers. Wow, Nitin, I love both your answers. They're fabulous. They're really telling me something about who you are. And Mrinal says, I take time off to understand it. That's wonderful. Faculty says, I take a nap. Okay, a lot of people say, when I'm angry, I can't sleep. I become insomniac. Okay, you're welcome, Nitin. I have to get back to this. And okay, so yeah, how do you manage feelings like anger and frustration? The 99% of the people say, I try to control, and patience. And even sometimes they say, I meditate when I get angry. I count to 10. Someone said, Vani said, I'm counting, backwards. Sometimes I count. I count to 10. Sometimes somebody says, I take a deep breath and I release it slowly. Now, all the things that you just spoke about are what we call coping strategies. So when the feeling is being experienced, it's a very strong feeling. They're coping strategies. Some people say, I release. I'll go and I'll yell somewhere. And when we were young, there was an organization, very famous one, I'm forgetting the name. They used to have an effigy of the boss, and anybody who wants, they can go and burn that effigy, or they can, vent out their emotions. Sometimes people go and run very fast, so they release all the emotions. Some people distract themselves. That's a great way to, divert the energy. But it gets diverted and it doesn't get channelized. So it's something like, you have a river flows, and there's a mountain that comes in the middle. And the river never climbs the mountain. And the mountain is this anger or frustration that you're feeling. It's very difficult for a river to go up the mountain, and life has to go on. So the river goes around the mountain, and you find a way to cope or manage the situation. So you manage the hostile feelings, you count to 10, you meditate. Mindfulness is like the counting process that Vani said. And you use systematic relaxation procedures. You take a deep breath and exhale. Now, a coping strategy is good. A coping strategy is good because what it does is it diffuses the energy from your emotions and makes them less powerful and less potent. And if you are very good at coping strategies, then it becomes a way of life. And then you'll end up, feeling that the anger is less and less control, and that you are more and more on top of the situation till the point comes that you stop feeling that feeling altogether. So you have kind of put out the fire in a way. And not only the anger goes, but the joy also goes, because the fire is burned out or released or distracted or diverted. And many forms of meditation, I'm not saying this is the only form, many forms of meditation, not all forms, are also forms of coping strategies. Are also forms of coping strategies. So they are not growing strategies. Some forms of meditation are growing strategies as well. So when you cope, you do not channelize the energy. You kind of, burn out the fire. You put out the fire. And the energy becomes less potent. And very often too much of coping leads to bottling up, channelizing. The energy gets moved inward, and it creates chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, blood pressures, and so many other stress-related disorders, autoimmune disorders, because the energy gets channelized and blocked, channelized inward and blocked in many ways when you cope. So for the moment, you have achieved temporary success, but in the long run, it doesn't work. In the long run, it works against you. It doesn't help you in any way. There's something called growing strategies, which is what we call emotional maturity. So when I say, hey, listen, I'm angry. So what's the experience of anger? Something churns in my stomach and my eyes, they bulge out and my mouth becomes, and I lose control on my speech. My voice becomes very, harsh. And so the more and more I recognize my anger, the more I stay on top of it, I can express it in more effective ways. Now, I'll give you the example of, yes, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was a very angry man. When he was in South Africa, he was angry with the white people because they had apartheid there, and he was not allowed to travel in a first-class compartment of a train. And he went and burnt all his ID papers in protest. He was an angry guy. He was angry that, why are you treating me like lesser than you? And then he says, I'm not living in this country. I'm going back to my home country in India. And he comes and he finds similar things happening here because the British are ruling him, the country. And he remains angry. And he says, okay, you have to quit India and there will be a civil disobedience movement. We will not cooperate with you. This is utilizing an assertive style of communicating. So he told the British, quit India, I will have a civil disobedience movement, I will not cooperate with you, I will not indulge in violence either. So he did not control his anger, he did not divert his anger, he did not bottle it up, he did not count to 10, he remained angry. And he says, I will not stop this fast until you leave my country. I am so angry with you. In psychology, we call this passive-aggressive behavior. So he channelized that anger into something so beautiful, we call it the freedom movement, into something so powerful, into something so great that it rewrote the history of the country. It was one man's anger. And look at how much energy it created and the ripple effect of that. So sometimes, my coaches and counselees, they say, hey, listen, my parents told me I'm a very stubborn person. I'm very stubborn and I want to do something about being my stubbornness. I want to become flexible and less rigid. And I say, hey, listen, that stubbornness is giving you some very positive energy. You're giving it the wrong label. How about saying, I'm very determined. When I put my mind to something, I don't listen to anybody. I don't even listen to myself. Salman Khan quotation, I know. So I transform the energy from that stubbornness into determination. And instead of reacting, and grow up, utilize active listening skills, listen to yourself, listen to others, be motivated, continue to stay motivated, don't get disheartened that, hey, listen, I cried today, and it was my performance appraisal session and I cried because I lost control of my feelings. Practice ways to maintain a positive attitude. Practice self-awareness, take critique well, and empathize with others. And I can give you a long lecture on each one of these, but I am going to simply say, when the water flows above the neck, guys, please seek help. And I'm going to take questions now. Any questions that you would like to ask? Raman, over to you. I'm sorry for taking too much time.
Nora, it's fine. I think what I would request participants is to just put the questions if they have in the chat box. And while they are doing that, I have 2 or 3 questions and I would like you to delve on them.
Sure.
One is that, we all want to be happy. And, not only be happy about ourselves, but we want happiness around us. So what are some of the strategies which we can use to basically be in that state?
So the first thing to recognize is that happiness is not that new BMW car that I just bought, or the new shoes that I just bought. I bought shoes and made me happy, or the lovely food that I just ate. Happiness is not something that is outside of you. It's not something outside that makes you happy, like having a new car or new shoes or a new dress or some good food, or even good alcohol to make you happy. So happiness, the doors to happiness open from inside out. So inside out. So you need to understand what are the primary sources of nourishment for your mind, heart, body, and soul. Look at yourself. What is it that nourishes my mind? For some people, it may be music, it may be poetry, it may be, music, it may be just a good heart-to-heart chat with a friend. Or some people, it may be doing service to others. For some people, it may be, just the act of giving a donation to somebody or healing somebody, like doctors heal. So listen to your mind. What makes your mind happy? What makes your heart happy? Nourish your heart, nourish your mind with the right things. What makes your body happy? What kind of food makes you happy? What kind of drinks make you happy? What is it that's nourishing your body? And how is your body feeling happy or not? What makes your soul happy? Gratitude, acceptance, forgiveness. So things like relationships, career, physical activities, spiritual practice, whether it's religion or just simply an attitude or a belief in something, or just a gratitude or 1 minute gratitude every day. And most importantly, it is the food, because what you eat is what you are. So when we do coaching around happiness, we look at the primary sources of nourishment that nourish you from the inside and move you towards happiness. Now, happiness is not a destination. It's a journey. You never really get there, but you feel better and better every day and happier every day. And the day you feel totally happy, maybe it's time to be one with the universe.
So coming from that, Kshiti's just put a question. How do you know or define that the feeling you are right now is happiness? So I think you have kind of covered it up, because it shows on your face, your body language, and the way you communicate. So those basically say it.
Oh yes, you know. Yeah. You know very well, because if it's that BMW car that you're driving that's making you happy, you know that, I'm a little scared that somebody on the road is going to bang it and dent it, and I don't want to give it to my driver to drive. I've got to drive it myself, and and you're so insecure about that car getting damaged, at the same time being happy driving it. So that's not pure.
Sure.
You don't need to. You don't need to think too much.
We have a very large list of participants who are actually students.
Yes.
And one of the things which I noticed during the last 1 year due to the pandemic was that it was very difficult to really talk to students and young minds about empathy. But I have realized that because of this pandemic situation, empathy across the generations have, come to a different level, or I would say matured a lot. You have any comments on that?
Yes, my one comment is that unless you are really working with human beings and with human behavior, empathy is not something that you can demand and expect from others. All you need to do is to work with yourself and be able to understand where does empathy lie within you, and enable others to connect with that empathy within themselves also. But I cannot say there's something I demand or something I really want to have from another person. You have to have empathy for me. No. Recognize what is happening to you inside you.
So you would say it has come from within, and of course the driving force was external, but it really brought it out as an emotion in many cases very successfully.
It lies within you. It doesn't lie out there.
Good. So we have a question here from KG Ramesh. How do you respond to people when they say there is no work-life balance? Can we separate our work and life?
That's unfortunate that today more and more of the education, particularly education has a big role to play in it, manages to separate work and life. So then they come to us some years later saying, hey, listen, I'm doing this work, I'm in this job and I hate every minute of it. And I always wanted to play the piano. I always wanted to write a poem. I always wanted to draw cartoons. And that midlife crisis happens when we are doing work that we do not enjoy. So a career is something that comes from your inner sense of purpose, your dharma. And it's like everyone's reading a book today called the Ikigai. So what is your purpose? Something that you love to do, something that you're good at doing, something that you can get paid for, because payment is also very important, and something that you will find buyers for. That is Ikigai. There's a need for that in our society. So it's a combination of these four things that determines what is your purpose in life. And we come under a lot of pressure because we go into medicine, engineering, management. We go into engineering particularly, and medicine and law, because our parents want us to, because we scored well in class and we did very well in our school and our +2. So I got admission, so I did this, and I did engineering, and then I go and I work for a company. I realize engineering is all about coding, and 2 years later I say, let me go and do management. Maybe I'll find a different job to do. And then you come to management and you go back and say, hey, listen, I don't enjoy this either. And so by the time half your life is gone. So
I know. I know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You've touched a very interesting point, because given a choice, I think every Indian kid wants to be a cricketer, earn money, play game, and have all the fun in life. But unfortunately, there are only 11 to 17 players, including the reserves in the ticket.
No, those are the dreams that are fueled from outside.
Yes.
Those are the dreams that are fueled from outside. Yeah. Those are dreams that are not real dreams. Even the great famous MS Dhoni said, the dreams are not the dreams that you see when you sleep at night. The real dream is the dream that does not let you sleep. So, I have this fantasy of being a cricketer and being a test player, and then that makes me feel very good. That's an escape. That's a coping mechanism. Again, that's a coping. So the real sense of purpose comes from somewhere deeper than the fantasy.
No, I agree with you.
That's what our experience teaches us.
Because you have to feel motivated, from within, because you have to work hard, you have to do things, only then you actually can achieve a purpose or something.
So when parents force their children to do medicine and engineering and law and management and all those subjects, or whatever they're not chosen of their own choice, then sooner or later they realize that their dream lies their purpose lies somewhere else.
Another question I have is, it's not a question actually, it's an observation. So I was walking down the Carter Road in Bandra the other day, and I just saw a new coffee shop opened, Coffee by Dibela. And there was this guy who was putting up a poster saying, Bandra is emotion. To be very honest, I think I have my interpretation, but what do you think he's trying to communicate because only people who were thronging in that coffee shop was all below 25 years of age.
Yeah. So first of all, it's an advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
And today, you know, they find that the logical and rational appeal in advertisements doesn't work anymore. So it's an emotional appeal they build. And then they build emotional appeal of different kinds. And here definitely they're building. So they're saying that it's a sentiment that Bandra is not just you know, a physical experience. You can go to Carter Road, take a walk. You can go to Joggers Park and do a bit of running over there. You can cycle down this road. You can walk down Pali Village and all those things you can do in Bandra, but it's not the experience. It's the emotion that that experience evokes in you. Some nostalgia, some fond memories, some happy moments. So this advertisement that you're seeing is asking you to relate to the culture and ethos of the place, not just the roads and buildings.
No, I thought it was wonderfully put, because it reminded me of, you know, the famous poster which many of us during our college days used to have, which was from World War II, which said, keep calm and carry on. And I think that was a very powerful message, because keep calm and not dash, dash, dash. You have many versions of that, but the message I thought was very, very powerful.
True. Keep calm, carry on.
Yeah. So we have a question here, which says that, what is that thin line that separates active expression of emotions and an emotional outburst? I think it's a good question.
Very good question indeed. You know, the three brains I talked about, the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the human brain, which is the cerebral cortex. So the reptilian brain has a certain part of it which is called the amygdala. It's called the amygdala, AMYGDALA. So that part of the brain is so hardwired, and fight, fright, or flight, self-preservation, self-image preservation is the most important in that. And there is something that happens in the brain which is called amygdala hijack. This amygdala hijacks the second and the third brain, and it overrules all the functioning. So logic breaks down, your emotions also break down. It's just an outburst, and it's hysteria. It's hysterical outburst, or whatever other word you may want to give. It's like a nuclear reaction that sometimes happens. It's happened to you, it's happened to me, it's happened to all of us. So that's the line that separates is where is your cerebral, where is your thinking? When thinking gets lost, and when logic and rational gets lost, the amygdala takes over, it hijacks. So that's what happens in such cases.
But it's very important to learn a coping mechanism which basically ensures it doesn't happen. Because if it happens in public, or if it happens in a situation where it can actually cause a lot of harm to you personally.
We have, as psychologists, we have methods and techniques, you know. We tell them, make anger your best friend.
Yeah.
And how do you make anger your best friend? By recognizing what triggers my angers. So over a period of 1 month or 2 months, we give them homework and say, every time you get angry, just note down what happened. What were the triggers? So someone will say, when my servant doesn't show up in the morning, I get angry. Someone else will say, hey, listen, when my AC conked off, it was so hot, I got angry. Or when my boss said one more thing, you know, to stay late and finish it before I go, that got me angry. So what are the things that trigger your anger, the typical situations? So understand the contours. Second, when you're angry, what is it that goes on in your head? What are the thoughts? What are the thoughts that go on in your head? And thoughts are like blaming thoughts. How dare he do this to me? Or how can this maid not show up today? Or, you know, how can this happen to me? You know, so what are the thoughts? Everybody has different thoughts. So everybody's anger is different. There's a unique individuality, bio-individuality to every person. So everyone's thoughts are different. So we get them to recognize the contours of their anger. What happens? How does it manifest itself? What happens to your eyes? What happens to your heart? What happens to your stomach? What happens to your voice? And when you start learning and putting down and labeling what is happening, then you get a better handle of it. 90% of the job gets done once you're aware of what it is about.
So we have 5 minutes more. So I'm just going to take 1 or 2 quick questions. So So Shruti says how a person can balance his life and he really cannot express his emotions with anyone else. And the second question is, what tips would you have for one to find his or her or ikigai at work so that your life's work can best play to your motivations, interests, passions, and abilities?
So I think the first question first, how a person can balance his life when he can't express his emotions with anyone. We come into this world alone and we die alone. In between, we live in a society. And the purpose of that society is to provide us opportunities to connect and learn about our emotions. And the universe gets set up in such a way that it conspires for you to confront your emotions and learn from them and grow and mature as a result of that. So a person definitely needs to interact, human interactions. There's a whole attachment theory I can explain. A lot of attachments with other human beings are required for us to be able to understand us, because in other people we find our mirrors to our soul lie in other people. And so that's the answer to Shruti's question. And Abhijit says, what tips to find ikigai at work? Okay, simple question of putting your mind to it and tracking. What is it that I enjoyed doing? Simple thing. What is it that gave me a kick? And at the end of the day, what is it that I really felt good about? And what is it that I didn't feel good about? So it's literally sorting out that part, you know. And what is it I'm good at? And when I'm tired, what is it that nourishes me? And exercise, you know, personally for me, something that nourishes me the most is to cook for my family. At the end of a hard day's work, I can just go in the kitchen and put together something, and I feel so happy doing that, you know. So that nourishes me so much. So what is it that nourishes you? What is it that replenishes your energy? What is it that, you know, and in that lies your ikigai. And at times, a lot of people say, and many in Indian philosophy also, it says that sometimes it's a bad experience that I had that gives me a sense of ikigai. So if Gandhiji had not been thrown off the train, he wouldn't have had the ikigai to fight for the freedom of the country. So sometimes bad experiences. A friend of mine lost her parents to cancer and then set up a whole cancer specialized, you know, a cancer care association. So sometimes something bad that happens in your life gives you a reason to a cause for ikigai.
No, you are absolutely right, because actually, you know, the whole idea is that how do you transform an emotional state so that it works for us rather than against us, to basically keep us going. Because at the end of the day, everything has to be done by us ourselves. And these are the directions which come to us. So we have another question, and which is why people change their colors like chameleon, though we keep good relations with such people. I guess it's our need to be good to them and be in relationship. And, you know, even sometimes when we know the people very well, we don't want to hurt them. Am I right in my understanding?
Never about the other person. It's always about you.
Yeah.
And it's good to recognize that everybody is an individual in their own right. And that individual does not get carved in stone. That individual also changes and evolves over a period of time. And different facets of that person come to light at different times of his life and in different contexts and situations.
Sure. You know, I have a few more questions, but I'm also looking at the clock at the same time. It's almost 5 o'clock. So all I can say in my summation is that every emotion teaches us something, you know, positive, negative, whichever way you look at it. It's being situational, and at that time or in that reference of mind, what we look at it matters to us. And I would also say that emotions should be used as a data which we need to process, and not necessarily as directives, because life can be only understood backwards, but it has to be lived forward as we keep going. So with those few words, I would say, Anita, thank you very much. I do hope most of the participants present, and we had close to 90 to 100 of them. They have something to take back home with them today. And thank you once again. Over to you, Dean Ramesh.
Yeah, thanks, Anita, for the nice presentation and, you know, your words of wisdom. I think at the end of the day, we all are human beings, and we need to control our emotions and channelize in the right way, like where we can take positive out of our life. I think it is enlightening exercise for all of us to go through this process. And as students who are participating, I think now you are in your you know young life. You have a lot of life to go ahead and live with that. And your controlling of emotion is equally important, and how you manage that will define your character. I think with those words, I thank both Anita for the presentation and Raman sir for moderating the session. I think for the benefit of the students, we are going to have much more webinar sessions of this nature in the coming days. I want everyone to take advantage of these sessions and maybe better human beings in the coming days. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And thank you very much.
Thanks from my side also to all the people who have organized this. And I hope that somebody somewhere, sometime in their lives, finds a way to transform their emotions into the energy. Every emotion has a positive intention,
Yes.
even if it does not feel right. Just remember that.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all the participant for participating actively in the webinar, and looking forward to more participation from your side in the coming days. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.